What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over equipping weapons or interacting with items based on a little prompt that pops up on the bottom of our screen. Usually press E to interact or E to equip or whatever. So basically once we're within a certain range of an item, then we can press E, actually pick up the item, and the logic is working as intended. If we already have it, it don't allow us to pick it up again, although you probably should be able to pick it up for ammo and things like that if necessary, which we can cover later. I was originally going to be covering picking up a weapon and dropping the current weapon you had. If, for example, if you can only have 2 weapons and you're picking up a 3rd weapon, you can switch out the weapon that you have for the weapon that you find and drop the other one on the ground. We will be covering that, but I thought this deserved an episode of its own because there's actually quite a bit going on here. The other important factor of this episode is we're going to be able to change the order of which our weapons are in based on when we pick them up. This might not matter, especially if you're doing a weapon wheel or things like that, but if you have a quick switch, so you press Y to switch to this specific weapon, or if you have only 2 weapons that you can have and you switch back and forth, it's going to be important to know the order that they're in. That way you can keep them in that order when you switch a weapon out. What I mean by that is, you see, if you're familiar with the series, in the last episode we actually had it to where it was the blaster, which is the default Unreal weapon, and then this weapon, which I'm now calling the Kingslayer, just because I thought of some random name. And then we had this SMG, which I'm now calling the Bruiser. Well, if I switch weapons, I go from Blaster to the Bruiser to the Kingslayer now. It's different than the original order we set it up in because that's the order I picked them up in. If I were to switch and I pick up the Kingslayer first and then the Bruiser, then I can go Blaster, Kingslayer, Bruiser. And you can see the name is presented on the right side above the ammo count now. Okay. So let's get into what we did and what we're going to need to change to make things work the way they are. Now, first of all, if you're new to this series, I think we're 12 or 13 episodes in. We're relatively far along. If you'd like to catch up, I'll leave a link in the iCard in the top right corner to bring you to the first episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series. If you're just interested in switching guns and pressing E to interact, then we're good to go. The first thing we're going to do to start off this episode is to change over some of the things that we already had to make it look in more of a way that we actually want. So first of all, we want to have a name to our weapons. You can see I've called this one Blaster, or Kingslayer, or Bruiser, whatever you want, right? But we're going to add a name to our weapon, and we're also going to add an index to our weapon specifically. And what I mean by that is we had our weapon wheel last time. Didn't technically have the wheel yet, but we were pressing a button to switch between all of our weapons. And we could have as many weapons as we wanted in it. We have a weapons array. So if we go to our character, you should remember that we made this weapons array, which was a T array of our base weapon class, and there was pointers to them. Okay, so that's good, and we can just switch between them by accessing the specific index in this array. But what if we don't have all of our weapons, or what if we don't grab them in order, right? Maybe we pick these up in a different order. So sure, this would work if I wanted to go 1, 2, 3 every time. And if your game is set up like that, then that's perfectly fine. But say I wanted the option to pick up this weapon, and then this weapon, and then this weapon, and go 1, 2, 3. That wouldn't exactly work. You could make it work by forcing it to look for the name or something along those lines. But I think what's better is to have a weapon index so that we know exactly which weapon should be associated with the mesh and the ammo that we're going to shoot out of it. We should know exactly what we want to change to when we pick it up. So let's go ahead and add these to our weapons. If you go to our base weapon.h class, or just whatever you called your base weapon, I've added 3 things now. I've added something called name. So it's just an F string, and it's going to contain the name of the weapon. Simple enough. I've added a boolean called isObtained. You can call it hasObtained, whatever you want. Basically, this is just a boolean that's going to be saying, is this equipped by a player currently? It's not too important for this episode. We are going to use it when we determine what weapon to switch to and the order that we're going to be switching to it. But it'll become a lot more apparent why we're doing this later on in the series. Lastly, I have something called index, which is, as I described earlier, it's basically going to be an index so that we know exactly what weapon we're using in the game. Regardless if we have all the weapons before it, say we have a rocket launcher at index 4, if we're ever accessing index 4 of the weapons array, if we have that weapon on us, then we know it's a rocket launcher. Okay, in our base weapon CPP, is obtained should be set to false, index should be set to 0, and the name can be set to a default. I just call it weapon. In our character.cpp now, if you go down to your switch to next primary weapon, this is how we were doing our switching beforehand. So in the last episode, we were using this method, and I've left a comment, use this method if you want all weapons to be in a certain order or acquired in a specific order. So basically, if we're going to have all weapons and we want to switch between them one at a time, like Doom, if you want to get to your shotgun, oh, we have to go through all these other weapons first to get to it. So this method that's not commented out, that's not in the green text, is the method that we're doing in today's episode, where it doesn't matter what order you pick up weapons in, they will stay in that order, and you will be able to switch between them. If you want this method, this is the weapon where you have to go through each other weapon in the sequence to reach the next one, like we did in the last episode. I will leave this in the code commented out for the entire series because I think it's an important distinction to make, and some people are going to like it one way or the other. In fact, some games do it better one way or another, so it might depend on your gameplay itself too. What we're doing here is we're going to essentially check if we have a weapon that has a greater index than what we're at, and then we are going to go to that weapon if there is one that we have on us. Meaning, say we're index 1, and that's a pistol. When I switch to next primary weapon, say I have a greater index, which is like index 3, and it's a shotgun. If I have that weapon on me, that's where is obtained comes in, then I can switch to it. Otherwise, we're going to set it back to 0 because 0 should be the next one in the sequence where we actually have a weapon that is obtained. You could check, but I'm going to assume we always have a weapon at weapon index 0. Alright, so if we're using this method, we're going to set up a boolean, and this boolean is going to determine if we found another weapon to switch to or not. Say we only have one weapon, well then we don't want to switch to another weapon, so we're not going to succeed. We're going to do a for loop, and we're essentially going to loop through all of the items in our weapons array. This weapons.num is our T array of base weapon pointers. So this contains all the weapons the player currently has on them. We start at 0. We make sure that we're less than weapons.num because we don't want to be equal to the highest amount in the array or greater than it because we will crash if we're accessing an index that does not exist in the array. And then we're going to increment like you do in all for loops. What we're essentially doing is we're checking if I is greater than weapon index. Remember, the weapon index variable was the one we made last episode that determines where we're at, what weapon we're holding. So, you know, if we're at weapon index 3, we were on the third weapon in the weapon wheel, essentially. But in this case, it's going to work a little bit differently. We're going to set it to the index that we're on in the weapons array. Okay, so I've opened up Paint to demonstrate this a bit. But say we have 3 weapons at index 0, 1, and 2 of the weapons array. We have 3 weapons in there, 3 weapons that the player has on them. The first weapon's a pistol, we'll represent it with P. Second one's an assault rifle, represent that with A. And the second one is, or the third one, but the second index is S, submachine gun. So the way this loop's going to work is it's going to check 0, the pistol, check if it's greater than our weapon index. So weapon index is essentially just a check for what weapon we're currently holding, right? So if we have the pistol out, which is our blaster in this case, then we're on weapon index 0, thus it's not greater, and it doesn't need to do this. But if weapon index is 1, well, then it's less than our current weapon index. We don't want to check it. We don't want to switch backward. We want to switch within a certain order. So if our first weapon is the assault rifle and we go to switch weapons, we want to go to our next weapon in the sequence. Now, if you don't have another weapon in the sequence, we'll still go back and set it to the pistol, but we want to check all of our possible options first. So, if we're on assault rifle and this loop is going through, it won't go through this if statement the first time. It also won't go through the second time because 1 is equal to 1, not greater than it. But if the loop then reaches the second and final, or index 2 of the array and the final index of the array, then we're at I is equal to 2. That's index 2. So if I is greater than weapon index, if 2 is greater than 1, which it is, we're going to go into the weapon and see if the weapon at that index has been obtained. And we will set that in the blueprint, and you'll see where that works. But let's assume for now that this is true as well. We have picked up this weapon. That's all this is really checking, if we picked up the weapon. Okay, so we picked it up. So if that's true, then we want to set our weapon index, the weapon we're currently holding, to the new index in that array. So the new weapon index should be 2. Then we want to call switch weapon mesh with the weapon at that weapon index. So we're looking in our array, grabbing index 2 because that's our submachine gun, and then we're going to grab the index variable from that weapon. So don't get confused. Weapon index is the variable we made last video that basically just checks for what weapon we are currently using. The index variable from the weapon that we made here in this episode, I call it the intended index of the weapon in the comment. Essentially, this just differentiates the weapons themselves for us. So if we go into our blueprint, you can see I have my base weapon BP, assault rifle BP, and submachine gun BP. If I go to base weapon BP, the index is 0. It's the 0 index. It's the first weapon that we have. We're using this just so we can differentiate them without checking their name, because maybe we want to change their names. We don't want to do a switch on that. And weapon type doesn't quite fit the bill either, because we might have more than one pistol. So if we just check weapon type, it won't necessarily work. Now, if you use weapon type and you only have one of each weapon, you only have one shotgun, one pistol, everything like that, then this will work just fine. But say you have multiple pistols, multiple shotguns, then this won't be enough alone. So I have an index that I've just assigned every weapon that is different from weapon index, because weapon index, the variable weapon index, is relating to the weapon that we currently have. It's the index of the weapons array that the player has that we are going to be currently using. The index variable from the weapon is just referring to what weapon it is. It's essentially an identifier of the weapon that we can read from and then know what to do with that logic. Okay, so in the base weapon BP, index is 0, assault rifle BP, index is 1, and submachine gun BP, index is 2. Great. So when we go ahead and call switch weapon mesh, this is the same function we made last time where we were switching both the weapon that was in our character's hand and the ammo that we use as our projectile class. And then when we switch next time, so see we're on the submachine gun already, we've moved to it. Now the loop is going to succeed and say, oh no, we switched, we don't need to switch again. But let's do this exercise again. Let's erase the arrow, which I could do much faster if I just made the eraser a little bit bigger, but that's okay. And say that we were already on submachine gun, or better yet, let's say we're on assault rifle and we don't have the submachine gun in our inventory. Okay, so do this. So say we're at the assault rifle right here, and we're on index 2 again. I is on index 2, so it's greater than our weapon index. But this check fails. We're not obtained, meaning we never picked up the submachine gun. Well, we don't want to go to a weapon we don't have yet, so we need to go back to the initial weapon in the weapons array. To do that, you see that, okay, this fails, so we get out of here. And then at this point, we've gone through all, we're greater than weapons.num. Well, we're actually equal to weapons.num, which means we're out of the bounds of the array, and if we were to go again, we'd crash, so we have to just exit the loop. And then we go to this little if statement, if not success. Success only gets set to true if these two conditions are met. Since this one failed, success never got set to true, thus it is false, And that's what this means. Exclamation mark success means not success, or basically that this Boolean ends up evaluating as false. So we set our weapon index to 0, which is, remember, this is the weapon we're currently dealing with, which means for us, the blaster. And then we call switch weapon mesh on that, which calls index 0, which will then give us the blaster with the blaster projectile class. Okay, so basically what that means is now, since we don't have anywhere to go from the assault rifle, our weapon index gets sent back to 0, so we actually traverse through the rest of the array, okay, and then come out the other side and say, oh, looks like we got to check index 0. We check index 0, which is a pistol. We have obtained it, and this is the weapon that we then equip. So that's how this will work. You don't need to do this, remember. You can go ahead and keep the old functionality we have, but this is a safe method to use for all instances. If you only have 2 weapons, if you have 30 weapons, whatever, it'll only give you the weapons that we have, and it will go in the correct order, even if it has to skip some because we don't have them. That's why I made this. So not the end of the world, and it's kind of complicated compared to the other method, but it is a safe method, and if you're interested in learning a little bit more of the code side, that's a cool way to see how you might be able to do it. Quick note, this little break that I have here at the end of this if statement essentially cancels out of the for loop. This is, okay, we've hit our condition, we've switched weapons, we can break, we no longer need this loop. That's the reason I'm doing it. If you don't do that and you have multiple instances that could pass both these if checks, then you could actually continue to switch weapons and skip some weapons in the cycle. So you'll want to make sure you break. All right. At that point, we're done with the code. We're just going to change a few things in the blueprints to be able to have the item pop up, so the press E to equip. And we're also going to add some functionality to the weapons themselves to be able to switch the classes we have. Okay, so let's go into base weapon BP. We're going to do some logic here that's going to trickle down to all the other weapons. However, you can use this exact same logic for any equipment, anything you want to interact with. You'll just have to change the name and obviously what happens when you interact with it. For example, if you're interacting with a door, well, you don't want to equip the door on your character. You want to open the door. So you have to change that part, and you'll have to change what object is being accessed. However, you can continue to use this method for any press E to interact options. If we go to our viewport, you see I have this new box around my weapon. And it's quite big. This one I'll probably make smaller in the future. But since our base weapon BP is the parent to both our assault rifle BP, and if I open my full blueprint editor, you can see this. You can also use the regular base weapon class. You don't have to use the base weapon BP. But if you do use the base weapon BP as your parent, then everything I add to here will get added to these, the other weapons that we have, which is good because we want to make sure that if the base weapon has a collider on it, then the other weapons will. Basically, just go to add component and type in box collision and select this one. And essentially, it's literally a collider that just lets us choose the area we want, but it's invisible. It doesn't have a mesh or anything. Again, this one's pretty big. But just make it bigger than your weapon, or as big as you want. And when the character is within this range, we will be able to do functionality. In this case, we're going to pop up the little message that says press E to equip with the weapon's name. And we're also going to check for if the player presses the interact key while that message is popped up, and then, of course, perform logic from there. But for now, I've added this pickup collider. I called it pickup collider. This is just a box collider. And you don't have to change anything specific with any of this. Just make sure it's overlap all or overlap all dynamic. I believe it starts as overlap all dynamic by default, so you shouldn't have to change anything, but maybe change the size to make it a little bit bigger to fit around what you want. Again, since my other weapons were children of base weapon BP, then they all have this collider on them, although the weapons themselves are different sizes, and the sizes I made the collision boxes are a little bit different as well. So, go ahead and put them where you want, position them correctly, and then you're good to go for all your weapons. Quick note, if you've been following the series, I did uncheck this where if we just run into our submachine gun, it gets added to our weapons array. You can always keep that. A lot of games do that, again, using Doom or Wolfenstein or Serious Sam as examples. You just run into them and it picks them up. You don't have to actually go and press E or anything to pick the weapon up. It just does it by colliding with it. If you want to keep that, then just keep this logic here and put it on all your weapons. Probably put it in your base weapon BP. Okay. But I've unchecked that. I'm leaving it here with a comment so you guys know. And now, what we need is the logic we want to perform when the player collides with this collision box, this box collider. So on the collider itself, if you click on it and scroll down the details panel, you can go down to your events as usual, and you'll see ones that say on component begin overlap and on component end overlap. Go ahead and hit plus for both of them, and it'll make 2 new events for you. What you want to do is drag off of the other actor node for each of them and check if it is your main character, your base character class. So for me, it's FPS tutorial character, so I just do cast to FPS tutorial character. And then if the cast succeeds, what we're going to do is, again, perform logic based on what we want to happen. In this case, we want the equip message or the interact message to display to the screen. So we need to perform that. What I've done there is in our character HUD, I've added a text box called equip item text that has press E to equip item as the default text. Put it where I want it on the screen and set it to be hidden by default so it only pops up when we want it to. Then in the graph of my character HUD, I've gone ahead and bound some logic called display equip text and hide equip text. If you go into your event graph on your character HUD, I'm going to add a little bit of functionality here to make your life easier. So before, every time we were doing an operation, we were casting to our FPS tutorial character, such as in where we were getting our pistol ammo and what is now submachine gun ammo, but I've called shotgun ammo, and our assault rifle ammo. We kept casting to our tutorial character every time, which we shouldn't really do because you only really need to do it once and then just access the variables from that. So in our event graph, if you type in event construct, you can then get player character, and this won't work for multiplayer, but we will change it when the time comes. Or you could get the owning player of this widget, which is actually a better way to do this, but again, we'll switch that around when we get there. And then cast to your character, and then drag off of the blue part, the as FPS tutorial character, and hit promote to variable. And it'll make a character reference for you, and we can just use this character reference everywhere. So feel free to do that, and then switch all of the casts to character reference. It'll also make it look a little bit neater. Then I have binding for get weapon name, so you can see that I've also added a text box for weapon name, called it weapon name text. In content, I've clicked down and hit create binding. And then in the binding, we're just going to get our weapon's name and then return it to the screen. The way this works is we grab our character reference, grab their weapons array, grab the weapon index from the character as well, and then drag off of our weapons array, type get a copy, drag in the weapon index. This will return the exact weapon that we have equipped, which is what we want, and we can drag off of that and grab our name of the weapon that we added earlier. Then you can add return nodes to a bind. You'll have one by default, and just drag in your name to the return node. I do make sure that the weapon that we are accessing is valid before doing this, because if it's not valid and we try and get the name, it will cause a crash. You can also make sure that your character reference is valid or your weapons reference is valid, but I do confirm that they are valid in the construct when I make them. I make sure that the cast succeeds before setting the reference. But if it's not valid, if the weapon we're on isn't valid, I just return n/a, not available, and there you go. That's what will display to the screen. Now, we're going to make 2 functions, display equip text and hide equip text. Remember, this is our equip text. You could bind it to what you want, but I think it's easier to just make 2 functions and call those functions when the time comes. So if you go into these functions, just hit plus function, call one display equip text, one hide equip text. In display equip text, we want to go ahead and make a string. I call the string item name because we can use the same text that we're adding to the screen for basically any interaction we're going to do. If we're going to be opening a door, if we're going to be interacting with something on the ground or some story element, then this will still be valid. So, like I said, string item name. To add an input, you just hit this little plus here, then choose the variable string, and then type out your name. And what we want to do is write out the message that we want to display. So I grab the append node. It's a string append, so you just click this, and then you have 2 strings. You can add as many as you need and put them together. So the first text I hardcode because I know that I am good to always have press E to equip as my first string. But the second part is dynamic. It's going to be what we're equipping. So if we want to equip, grenade or assault rifle or shotgun or something like that, we need that to be displayed by what's written in the display equip text, which we'll cover shortly. But just drag in the item name, the variable, the parameter that gets passed into this function, and drag it in like that. You can go ahead and set your equip item text to this value. So equip item, just make sure that your text box is marked as a variable. Then you can drag your variable onto the screen, hit set text. It will ask for text, but you can drag in the string. It'll do the conversion for you. And then I go ahead and also set it to be visible because it's marked as hidden by default, which means we want to be able to see it. Lastly, in our character HUD, we need to do the hide equip text function, which you don't need to have any parameters for. We just are simply going to mark the text box as hidden because we set the text before we mark it as visible in the display equip text. So we don't have to reset what's in it before marking it as hidden or anything like that, since it will be reset before it gets marked again as visible the next time the function is called. So all you do is same thing we did to make it visible. Drag your text box onto the screen, set visibility, and mark it as hidden. Now the logic in our character HUD is done, so all we have to do is find the way to call these functions. And we do that in our base weapon BP. And this isn't actually what you think. This isn't the display equip message and a hide equip message in the character HUD. Remember, this was display equip text and a hide equip text. So these are different. You're like, why are you doing this? Well, I'm going to show you how to use a blueprint interface. So let's go ahead and make a blueprint. I just put mine right here in my blueprints folder. But you go add new, blueprints, blueprint interface right here, and name it whatever you want. I call it Hud Notify Interface. And essentially what this is it's a blueprint where you can define functions that you want certain classes to be able to call or to have functions called on them, but you don't define any of the functionality here. Thus, the functionality can be different for each character or class that it is called on. So in this case, for our character, we're going to use this notify. That way we can call our character class without needing the specific reference to it. And we could do different logic depending on what item is being passed into it. That's the most important part here. So go ahead and hit the little plus here to add 2 functions. In fact, you should already have one by default when this opens. So you should only need to add 1. But I call them display equip message and hide equip message. Again, I'm not saying anything about weapon because we're going to use this for our interaction and other things that pop up. So I'm specifically not mentioning weapon or anything like that. That way we can use it down the line. Make sure display equip message has both string, the name, so the name that we want to apply to that dynamic part on the HUD, to the B string here and append. That's what I was referring to. We're going to pass this along to our character HUD. and make sure it has an actor, which is an item reference. I make it an actor because, again, we don't know if it's going to be a weapon, so you don't have to use base weapon BP. Use the parent of that. If you look at the parent of base weapon BP, it's going to be base weapon, and the parent of my base weapon class is an actor. So we can make it anything that has an actor as its parent will be able to work here. So I make an actor, and the way you do this is you select the variable type, search for actor, hover over this and hit object reference, to then type in the name, item reference. In my hide equip message, I don't have any inputs or parameters, so you don't need to make any there. And then when you go into your first person character, you can click on class settings to then open up your options. We're going to add the Hud Notify Interface that we just added so we can access those functions. You just hit add and select the interface that you want. I already have selected mine, so it's not in the list, but if you don't have it, then you just find it right here, click it, and it gets added. Then you can use these events that we made in the interface. So, in our base weapon BP, we can now call these functions on the character. So if we drag off of these casts, since we made sure that it is a character, in fact, colliding with our pickup collider, we can then call the functions that we just made. So if we begin overlapping with it, we want to call display equip message. Otherwise, we want to call hide equip message. Now, for the display, we need to pass in two things. We need to pass in the name that we want to use for the message and the item reference. The name is the name of the base weapon. Remember, we set our names earlier in here. We have name as Kingslayer, as Bruiser, or as just weapon, blaster. So that's the name getting passed in. And then we also need the item reference. Well, the item is the one that we're overlapping with, so just get a reference to self. Just type self, and then drag that into the item reference. Now, in our first person character, which is our character blueprint, we have our guy where we switch out our weapons and such. We go into our event graph, and we can go ahead and perform functionality when these events are called, otherwise known as handling events. So we just type in, we have to look for the specific one, but when you're looking for an interface call, you can either call the message, send the message, or you can handle it. We want to specifically type event display equip message. If you just type display equip message, it'll still come up, but you'll have a bunch of different options. You'll have one to call it from the interface, one to just call this function, or one to handle the event. We want the event. So click on this one, and do the same for hide equip message. And then what we want to do is call the character HUD reference, because we are now going to be spawning the character's HUD from the character, which is good because we were only spawning it when the level spawned originally, which won't work in multiplayer. We need to spawn the character, spawn their HUD, and then assign the HUD to the character. Then we can get our HUD reference, and then we could use it as an owner. So, in begin play of your character, I got player controller 0 again, but really it's not necessary. We can get the owning player controller of this character. I go ahead and go create widget, and then select our character HUD. Drag off of that, promote it to a variable. This is your HUD reference now. I've already got one, so I'm going to delete this one. But if you hover over it, you can see that it is my character HUD reference. So that's what I called it. And then I go ahead and add it to the viewport. You could just as easily do this. I don't know why I made it look like that. So there you go. So this will still display your HUD just like we were doing in the level blueprint, which now means, of course, you can go into your level blueprint where we were spawning the HUD and remove everything from begin play to clean things up a bit. Okay. Now we have our HUD reference, so we can use our HUD reference to call functions on it, because we only want to call the display equip text on the character that is close enough to the weapon or the item to be able to interact with it. We don't want this to go across everybody's character, everybody's screen. That would be very confusing and not good. So we now use our HUD reference. Technically, you should make sure if it's valid first before using it. And you can go ahead and call your functions now. Display equip text. You can also call hide equip text right here. And then remember the name we passed in from the base weapon BP was the name of the weapon in this case, but it could be whatever item is calling this function. So you just pass the name along right into the item name of this function. We want to take our item reference and do a cast to determine what type of item we are interacting with, or that we are close enough to interact with. And we want to store it, that way we know if the player presses E, or whatever the key or button may be, then we perform the correct functionality. So we drag off of our item reference that got passed along, which in base weapon BP was self. And then we cast to find out what type of weapon it is. You'll probably do the parent class of whatever you want to test. For example, this is base weapon BP, but if I need to press E to grab some ammo out of a box or something, I could then cast with base ammo BP and things like that. In this case, we just need weapon. So just drag off cast to base weapon BP. If the cast succeeds, then we know this is a base weapon BP class that we are interacting with, that we are close enough to be able to pick it up, and then we will go ahead and call it whatever you want. I still call it interaction actor because if we have more options here, we can still use this one variable to do everything. We don't need to make a new one for a base weapon BP. We're just determining what actor we are actually colliding with, what actor we are within proximity of. In this case, it happens to be base weapon BP because this cast succeeded. Now, don't drag off of your base weapon BP and promote to variable because we're just going to use a standard actor here as our variable type. Because if we have other things than weapons, like I just mentioned, well, we can't use that if it's a base weapon BP, and we don't want to make a bunch of variables that we don't need. We just want to set the actor that we're handling. We don't need to specifically know that it's a weapon right now. That will come as we use it. So all we need to do is make a new variable, select the type as actor, and make it a, whoops, I clicked it a little fast, and make it a reference, as you know, right here. And then you'll be able to set it just fine. Just drag off of interaction actor, drag it into the white spot, and I'll say, oh, set interaction actor, and there you go. Now, we have the actor that the player is colliding with, so we know what we can perform functionality on. The last thing we need to do is, if they press the key to interact, we want to perform the right logic. We can go back to our main section here, hit Edit, Project Settings, go to Input. We're going to add a key just like we would anything. So add an action mapping right here, call it Interact or whatever you want, and then search for the key you want the player to press to perform the action. In my case, I've chosen E, so I type in E, look through all the things with E in it, and find E right here. Then I've got it here, so I can close this. We're going to check if that button has been pressed. So you can type in input action with the name of the input action, which I called interact right here. You click it, it'll bring it up for you. I've already got one, so I don't need that, but you can see it's right here. Now the logic we're going to do here might seem a little bit redundant because we are going to cast the actor into a base weapon BP. Again, this will make sense as we get more items to interact with, why we're doing it this way. But we do need to cast the actor into the base weapon so that we can grab the appropriate variables for them. Otherwise, if you just drag off the actor, even if it's storing a base weapon, you won't be able to access something like is obtained, which is the variable we need in this case. So grab your interaction actor, cast it back to a base weapon BP, since we know that it is a base weapon BP. And only if the cast succeeds, then we use it to grab the variables we want. We need to set is obtained to true. Is obtained, again, is the boolean we made earlier to basically say that we have picked up the weapon. We have essentially acquired what we need to acquire, and we do have this weapon in our inventory and it is available for use. You can also use this is obtained boolean to disable weapons momentarily. For example, if you can't switch to a certain weapon for some reason, or if you lose your weapons due to part of the story, you can always keep them in the weapons array, but go ahead and set is obtained to false, and our new logic in the code will skip over them. We want to set it. Then we go ahead and add this new weapon to our weapons array if it's unique, meaning there's not already one in there, because we don't want to add duplicates. So let's get our weapons array, just get weapons, and then we search for add unique, and then drag in our base weapon BP. Then, off of our add unique, you have a return node. The return node will tell you the index that it got added to. However, if it's -1, it wasn't unique, meaning it's already in the array. You can see it here in the message. So we actually want to check and make sure it's not -1 before we perform the logic to switch to our next primary weapon. If we want to switch to the weapon as soon as we pick it up, and we already have a weapon, then we don't want to switch to that weapon when we go to pick it up again, because if you do that, it'll throw off the logic. We already have the weapon we're trying to use. If we're trying to pick it up again, it will be weird. Now, you can pick up 2 of the same weapon that are different weapons, right? You can have 2 blasters or 2 submachine guns or whatever, but you can't have 2 of the same instance of the weapon. So if I have 1 blaster and it's got 12 bullets in it, and I'm holding it, well, I shouldn't be able to pick up that same weapon and switch between the same weapon. I should just have 1 weapon and I can use it. And if I don't have a second weapon, then I probably can't switch. Or maybe I can holster it or something like that. But basically, just drag off of the return node of add unique, say ! equals, or type in not equal, and then make it -1. Or, whoops, not -2, -1. And that'll say, okay, make sure that it is not already present in the array. Do a branch off of this. And only if it's true that it is not already present in the array do we call switch to next primary weapon. Now, switch to next primary weapon was a function we made in code last time. It's where we updated this logic in this episode. However, if you've been following the series, it is not blueprint callable as of now. So you have to go down, go to your header file of your character, look for where you made your functions, and make sure you make switch to next primary weapon a U function that is blueprint callable. I went ahead and added the category weapon anyway, just to be safe. But you don't need the category, it is optional. Make sure you build as usual. Go into Unreal, compile if necessary, and then you'll be able to call this function. So call it, it will perform the logic, switch to primary weapon, or switch to next primary weapon, then performs logic to call switch weapon mesh, as you watched us do earlier, switch weapon mesh. So when this gets called, we then call the event in here, which now doesn't call off the weapon we're holding, but instead the weapon we're passing it, which is the weapon we're trying to switch to, which is the index of the base weapon. You can see that right here. And that's how our order gets retained. So as we go up to a weapon, I've already got this. This would be -1 if I were to equip this. Thus, we're not going to do the logic to switch weapons. I don't have this weapon, so if I press E, I equip it and I switch to it. Then I can switch between my 2 weapons that I have. Now, same thing with my assault rifle. If I go over to my assault rifle, I can press E to equip it. I have these 2 weapons. And then if I go and select my bruiser, I can equip it, and then I can switch between all 3 of these weapons in their retained order. So there you go, guys. That's how we can equip weapons by pressing the interact key. That's how we can swap weapons and maintain their order. And we can display a little interact text on our character's HUD when they're within range of interacting with an item. I hope this video helped you. More than anything, I hope it gave you some insight on how we can mess around with our player's inventory. That's essentially what we're doing. We might not have an inventory screen and all that yet, but it's really just playing around with the items that our character has in his or her inventory and manipulating the values so that we get what we want. We equip what we want. If it did help you, please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do, and it just lets me know I'm doing a good job. I really appreciate it. Just wanted to let you guys know that we do have the option for a membership. You're allowed to join the channel and support the channel. This will help me put out higher quality videos because I can spend more time on it. And also, you'll get some perks for doing so. However, I'm not locking anything that you guys already have behind that. So you can still watch all the tutorials for free and make your game for free. I'm not going to lock any special videos behind there or anything like that. So it's completely optional, but I wanted to let you know. You can also do this on Patreon for the same perks. It's whatever you prefer if you decide to do it. If you guys had any trouble with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join Discord. In the description below, you'll be able to find a Discord link to get you into the community. If you join the community, we'll be able to help you with any of the issues you have and give you some insights and just honestly hang out and have fun. We've got a really nice community. I'm very, very happy and proud of it. Lastly, guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, twitch.tv/ShawnTheBro27. We've been playing Demon's Souls lately, which is, it's a lot of work, I will tell you. And we've been finishing up the Resident Evil 7 DLC. That way we can be ready for Resident Evil Village when it drops. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I'm Shawn the Bro, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.